I was rebelling against high school, and they expected me to go to a Ivy League school, and I was definitely scouted by some Ivy League schools, and I thought, I really kind of want to stay here. Who would move out of San Francisco?
That was poet and artist Kim Shuck. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. In this podcast, we get to know Kim, the most recent ex-poet laureate of San Francisco. On her mom's side, Kim is a fifth-generation San Franciscan, and she traces that lineage for us. On her dad's side, she's a member of the Cherokee Nation and has ancestors who went from Georgia to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. Kim talks about growing up in the city in the 1960s and 70s. She ended up staying in town to go to college at SF State, which she ends part 1 on. Check back Thursday for part 2, the conclusion of Kim's life story, and our last podcast of 2021. Here's Kim.
My mother was also born in San Francisco and grew up here, and she was a Sea Scout, which when my mom was a young lady meant that she arranged donuts on plates when the Navy came to town.
Okay.
My father...
Wait, is that facetious about the donuts?
No, that is literally what happened.
That's the extent of being
I don't
a Sea
know.
Scout?
There may have been more of it, but that's what she remembers. Mm-hmm. She was walking away from the arrangement of donuts with her friend Kathy, who was also a Sea Scout. So they were walking up Market Street towards the Castro. And my dad and his friend Joe, who were in the Navy, were walking down Market Street towards the donuts.
Okay.
And my understanding is that it was a time when it was not illegal to have things like ocelots that you walked in the downtown area on a leash. Mm-hmm. And the ocelot of one such person got spooked and attached itself to my mother. And my father, being very much a Boy Scout kind of guy, scruffed it and detached the claws.
Oh my God.
And then Mom wanted to go out with his friend Joe, but Joe thought that the height difference would be too weird because my mother is not quite as soaringly tall as I am, and Joe was well over 6 feet.
Okay.
And
it just would have been a strain on her neck after a while, I would think.
Or it would look weird when they were dancing. I think that was the concern.
Yeah.
So that's how my parents met. And then they wrote to one another for a long period of time while Dad was on cruises for the Navy. And then they got married.
Do you know when that meeting, was it on Market Street that this
It was on Market Street, about 6th and Market.
Okay. And do you know about when?
I want to say it was the late 50s. I want to say... Maybe, yeah, the late 50s.
Okay.
And then...
Was he stationed in Alameda by any chance?
No, he was stationed at TI.
Okay.
So that's my dad.
Okay.
And he ended up in the Navy from Oklahoma because when he went to go enlist, and he really wanted to get out of Oklahoma and away from his parents.
I can imagine and relate.
You'd have to go... I mean, the town is now condemned, so it's...
He knew something.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It had been sinking for a while. It was a mining town in northeastern Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. A pretty part of the state, at least.
It's very pretty.
Ozarks.
It's very pretty. It's not quite at the Ozarks, sort of almost Flint Hills. Anyway, he wanted to go enlist, and he wanted to be a Marine, but the Marine recruiter was closed, and the Navy recruiter was not, and so he became a naval officer. And he enlisted in the Navy. Mm-hmm. And it was career, and then stopped being career and became an electronics engineer in Silicon Valley at the early edge of that.
Okay.
So that's my dad. And my mom...
that would have been the 60s?
70s.
70s, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he finally was done with the Navy in the 70s. And then...
But meeting and I'm assuming marrying your mom?
Yeah, totally marrying my mom.
That's what brought him out here to live.
That's probably what stuck him out here, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
although it could have been that he probably would have ended up in Texas if he wasn't in California because of the tech thing. My father's a genius. In a time when we use that word in a really undifferentiated way, my father's still a genius. He's really incredible.
And your mom's family is the one that has deep and long SF roots.
Yes.
Okay.
So her parents met at the Polish Hall. The way the story gets told, I'm not entirely sure that they didn't get married because they looked good dancing together.
There's dancing again.
It's very difficult to know.
Yeah.
You know?
I do kind of love that. I mean,
it is sort of cool, right?
and it's not necessarily like what you're talking about is they looked good dancing together.
Yeah, they looked good dancing together. You know, they were good size for one another. My grandmother, once again, not quite as soaringly tall as my mother. So we're talking well into the 4 foot something or other range. But my grandfather was only about my height, like 5'3". So not a notably tall group of people. I am actually the tall woman in the family.
Okay.
I'll have you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Did you grow up with those grandparents?
I did. I had 4 grandparents until high school.
Were your
the
dad's
end of
parents
high
still in
school.
Oklahoma, or where were they?
Yeah, my dad's parents continued to live in Pitcher, where my grandfather passed away, and my grandmother ended up living in Miami, Oklahoma, after that because they condemned Pitcher, so she had to leave.
So you spent a little bit of time going out to visit them?
I spent time with them. I spent time with the other grandparents. I had 2 great-grandmothers that I knew pretty well who weren't gone until like my junior year in high school.
Okay. Was that here in San Francisco? Those great-grandparents?
No, one of them lived in northeastern Oklahoma in the same town as my grandparents, and the other one by then she had lived in San Francisco, but by then she was living in Connecticut.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So,
do you know the story of whichever, on your mom's side, whichever ancestor came to San Francisco, and if so, like what it was that brought them?
Why San Francisco?
I mean, because that's the story of essentially why you're here.
Yeah.
It's the origin of that story.
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure I know why it was San Francisco. But, you know, San Francisco has called to people since really before it was San Francisco. It's kind of a remarkable place in a lot of ways. It's the weather is good. I mean, we're looking out the window right now at quite a lovely day.
Mid-ish December.
Yeah, although I am looking at a house right now that was ill-advisedly painted charcoal gray and is now looking quite scabrous as the gray paint peels off in the sunshine. But apart from that, you know, it's mid-December and it's really nice. So we're not subject to any real dramatic shifts of weather. And
natural beauty kind of all around us.
You know, writers and other people, I couldn't tell you what the draw really necessarily was, but it's a great place to land, you know, particularly if you're willing to invest in it and make your art here, you know, as opposed to just robber baron everything. I mean, there is a certain amount of extractive influx
literally
at the moment.
Yes.
But that's not always going to be the case. And you see various, you know, waves of it. And presumably there'll be a medium-sized earthquake. And like the last medium-sized earthquake, a bunch of these people will just go, oh my goodness, the ground shakes here, and they will leave. And then we will have our space back and it will be fine. And the people who've invested emotionally and in terms of community, who it doesn't matter to me where or when they came, if you're investing in the place emotionally and in community, then please feel free, you know, come play.
And that sounds like what at least your mom's side of the family.
Yeah.
They've been those types of folks.
Yeah, well, my grandfather helped build a lot of it because he was part of he was a housing contractor. He sort of landed in the painters union, but I mean, he was part of the whole process here at one point. And, you know, my mom, who really at the time didn't have to, I mean, when I was a kid, because I had a 2-parent house, mom didn't really have to work. That's how the whole thing was designed, right? One of them stays home. But she ended up working at the school across the street, even though she didn't have to, and ended up being a special needs para for many, many years, helping kids who were mainstreamed into the school district. And you know, definitely invested. When I was a kid, my mom was one of the founding members of the first co-op nursery school in San Francisco, which was Noe Valley Nursery School. And the teacher of which was Nina. Her last name wasn't Jonkelson at the time, but we'll just say it was Jonkelson because that's what it became later and what it was before. And mom missed the first planning meeting because she was having my brother. But I was part of the first co-op nursery school. The co-op nursery school started the Noe Valley Street Fair, which hasn't been around for a long time, but was for a very long time an institution in Noe Valley. And the 2 bands that played at the first one were Jefferson Airplane, who beat out the Grateful Dead. But I think Moby Grape also played. Okay. So these are San Francisco stories for real.
Yes, they are.
I believe they were paid in food, too. I don't think they got a check.
I mean, I get it. Where was that fair?
It was on 24th Street between Sanchez and Castro. And it was there for they did it yearly for a long time. But it started as a fundraiser for the nursery school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And your mom worked there, even though, like you said, she didn't have to.
She didn't have to.
Yeah. And because of that connection, you and your brother both went there?
We both went there, and then my kids went there when they got old enough to go.
Awesome.
But on that side of the family, we went to Alvarado Elementary for a period of time. And mom had gone to Alvarado Elementary.
Okay.
And her godmother had gone to Alvarado Elementary when it was located at a different place. Okay. So the city's grown and changed while we've been here. We've definitely seen a lot of it. And I reserve the right to be a little snotty about how I think people are in this place, but 100%. But also it's one of those places where if you're willing to throw down and participate, it's like I don't see any reason why to be nasty about it, because we need new artists. It's not like every artist is going to raise artists, you know.
Right. So let's then I guess talk about your immediate family. Was it just you and your brother?
Me and my brother.
Siblings? Okay. And he's older.
Nope.
Oh, you're the first.
I am the oldest.
Okay.
On my dad's side, I'm the oldest. My dad was the oldest. My grandfather was the oldest. I was the first great grandchild.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, can you tell folks what neighborhood, besides school, like what neighborhood y'all grew up in and
mostly the Mission, the Mission, Noe Valley, the Castro, that hillside right there, that ridge between the Castro and Noe Valley, and then down towards, Valencia. I went to Marshall School. I went to Edison. I went to Everett. So
that's the middle school, right? Everett.
Everett is the middle school. That's the one that's
over on Church.
Yeah. Basically, you couldn't be closer to the Mission because the Mission is literally on the other side of the block across the street from there. So.
And did you grow up in the house that's on?
I didn't grow up in that house. Okay. That was my, that's the grandparents' house. But, the family's been there for a really long time. And the grandparents lived in a bunch of different places. I had a funny moment where I had a friend who used to work at the Castro Gardens restaurant on Castro between 18th and 19th. And he passed a while back. But he had an apartment on Collingwood And I was there having tea with him one time, just sort of looking around going, this room looks so familiar. And then I realized that that's where my grandparents had lived when my mother was born.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's like
There's a reason.
I find myself in places in the city where there are snapshots of
from when you were very young.
Well, or from when my mother was very young.
Yeah.
You know? And then at one point, my great grandmother cleaned house for then Father Lynn, who is now commemorated at Most Holy Redeemer as Monsignor Lynn. And it's like, you know, the marks that different lives leave and the sort of webs of lives lived in this city go pretty deep.
What was your mom's family like her maiden name?
Her maiden name is Vielgush.
Okay.
Okay. But the great grandmother who kept house for Father Lynn was their last name is Węgrzyn, which is not spelled like that sounds.
Okay.
It is Polish, and it is from, you know, that part of Eastern Europe where there was a dearth of vowels.
Do you want to? Okay, so maybe what decade did you grow up in, and what was San Francisco, and especially those neighborhoods? What were they like?
I grew up in the 60s and the 70s.
Okay.
And what was it like?
Nothing major happened in that area.
Nothing major in the 60s as far as I can recall.
Nothing.
It's really, it's very funny because when I was a kid, I think I thought that smell was cologne. That all of the adults smelled like. And it was years later when I realized that it was pot. What else was interesting about then?
Well,
I don't know. There was all this great foment of fabulous just creativity. So people bought a bunch of. It's sort of the opposite of what's happening right now. So we've got all of these houses being painted matte gray, or different colors of gray, and then as a bit of an aside, periodically you get a beige one. But what was happening in San Francisco at that time was all of the old Victorians were getting painted really complicated. Like every single detail is picked out in something, and then you start seeing like gold leaf on some of it, and hand painting the houses, and then there are a couple other things. You started seeing people embellishing the periodic pillars in front of people's houses. Would occasionally, like, some artist would move in, there'd be extra sculpture put onto the. I'm thinking of a couple of houses in the Haight right now. Almost everybody I knew was most parents seemed to be making things of some sort, and you could always sort of learn really cool things from them. So I think there's one funny story where one of my fellow students at Noe Valley Nursery, his father was a sculptor, and his mother came home and was like, "Why can I only find one of my boots?" As he's getting ready to pour plaster of Paris into one of her boots. It's like, do not pour plaster of Paris into my boot. But there was always some sort of creativity going on. And I remember a moment in my childhood where most of the toys stopped being injection molded plastic and became handmade wooden toys. And
awesome.
I have a pretty good memory of a lot of things that happened in the late 60s and the early 70s, and a lot of the adults who were there have no such memory because of that smell of that I thought was cologne.
Right. What kind of things were you, besides creativity, or what kind of things were you doing, running around with friends?
Mostly, well, I was at one of those times when, your parents would kick you out of the house and go, don't come back until there are bats. So, we'd run around. I was across the street from a schoolyard, so I used to go skate, and then the kid down the street. Roller skate. Yeah. And then the kid down the street helped me learn how to ride a bicycle. And I run into his brother periodically, who is in the police force. I mean, so some of us are still around.
Yeah.
What else? I played a lot of jacks.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of jacks.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know if it appealed to me because I have fine motor skills, or if it developed my fine motor skills. I'm not sure.
Chicken egg.
Totally. But there's definitely a relationship with the fact that I did it a lot in that.
The thing I remember about jacks, we had them in my house too, but also like if they were left out.
Oh, sure.
Stepping on them is fun.
Oh, you know what? With the father I had and you really didn't want to be the cause of some kind of midnight injury. The Legos and the jacks were pretty well put away. Yeah. So those are some of the memories. I mean, the outdoor concerts and stuff were really incredible. The San Francisco Mime Troupe was a big deal for me when I was a kid. And what else?
Can I ask a quick question? Because you mentioned roller skating. Our guest on next week's episode that I'm editing right now is David Miles of Church of Eight Wheels.
Yeah.
Did you know about them? Or they maybe
I didn't, but we had another kid in the we had one of the Calvellos in the nursery school whose aunt was a roller derby queen.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
So there was that.
Were you big into roller skating?
I was kind of into roller skating.
Antique skates.
There's some antique skates in the other room. Awesome. That is entirely true. I just gave Doug a skate key because, it's a romantic gesture. I have a zoo key from back in the day too, the San Francisco Zoo.
Well, no, that's a great example. Like, what kind of things as a kid? Different parts of the city.
Sure.
Would you go to like Fisherman's Wharf? I don't know.
When I was older, I did Fisherman's Wharf. We played a lot in the playground at the park, and of course the diggers were on that side of and it was that time, and the diggers were there at that end of the park as well, which is a good linky to Diane de Prima.
Sure.
Who was another poet laureate of San Francisco. And then, so when I was in elementary school, Ruth Asawa had started the Alvarado Arts Project, and she was a neighbor. Oh. And my mother did a lot of stuff with her. And
did you know her?
I knew her really well. She was probably my first art teacher.
Oh, wow.
The thing is, that's not as unusual as it might sound. It's like, yes, this internationally known phenomenal artist was my first art teacher, me and thousands of other students in Alvarado School over the years. But we became friends later too. So she was probably my first art teacher. We ran into each other later on. And I was doing some other stuff. I had independently from her done a lot of work with origami, and we became friends again. And then we lost track again and became friends again when I was in art, when I was actually doing my MFA in art at SF State. Oh. And
by the way, almost everyone who's been on this show, and then myself included, there's an SF State connection. It's the number one connection on the show.
SF State is an incredible school, and a lot of the things that Berkeley likes to claim they actually started at SF State. Yeah. For example, for a while I worked in the American Indian Studies department out there, and ethnic studies started at San Francisco State. It was the first place that had an actual school of ethnic studies.
Wasn't that a result of the strike?
And it was a result of the Third World strikes, which was also part of the whole free speech movement. And the takeover of Alcatraz also had a real SF State connection, which is why there is a Richard Oakes room in the student union. And it's an incredible school. It always was an incredible school. It's becoming slightly less incredible, but I, again, have to say things go in waves. Yeah. It will get to the point where it now starts ticking off the students who will then take some charge of it and reverse all of the bad things that have happened. It's a, one step forward, one step back, one step forward. It's we're cha-chaing is what we're doing. It's the great cultural cha-cha.
Do you want to talk about your Cherokee?
My Cherokee heritage?
Yeah.
So I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, which is very specific and would probably take way too long to explain the specificity of it. My family is originally from northern Georgia. We came to Oklahoma as part of the great relocation project that was the Trail of Tears. And my family are some of the people who survived that walk. So that's us. And
when did the name Shuck come in and
oh,
why?
don't ask that question.
Okay.
The family is complicated. This is what I will say about that side of the family. The family is incredibly complicated. Most of the stories that I was told as a child are marginally true, but not the parts you would expect. So it's really confusing. We're sort of trying to track some things down now. My brother talked my father into doing sort of the ancestry testing thing. Mm-hmm. We found out some very exciting and completely new to us pieces of information about the family that are kind of cool. So we're kind of taking it in right now, and the stories are all shifting to the extent that it's really hard to say. But what we do know is that my grandfather's mother's grandfather was the head of the Cherokee Supreme Court for a period of time. Wow. That were related to a lot of people that you've heard of who are Cherokee. Mm-hmm. The other side of the family is a little more mysterious, and we're kind of learning some new things about that at this time. But
okay, fair enough. Let's go back to your life. I mean, you mentioned SF State, but let's tell a version of your story that gets you to SF State. Yeah, you did names up some schools, but
Alvarado School, and then Marshall, and then Edison, and then Everett, and then another school who will remain nameless because they piss me off. And then San Francisco State, in part because I was rebelling against high school. And they expected me to go to a Ivy League school, and I was definitely scouted by some Ivy League schools, and I thought, I really kind of want to stay here. Who would move out of San Francisco?
That was Kim Shuck. On the next Storied San Francisco, hear the rest of Kim's story. It will also be our last podcast of 2021. Part 2 drops Thursday wherever you listen to podcasts. Music for the podcast was produced, performed, and curated by Otis McDonald. Original photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast is our contributing producer. And the show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. Now in our 4th season, we have more than 160 episodes available on our website, storiedsf.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can, please rate and review our show so we can reach even more folks. We love email. Drop us a line at storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay strong, stay healthy, keep dreaming, and we'll see you next time on Storied San Francisco.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcasts.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.